US job openings just saw a massive surge thanks to more manipulation. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, we welcome back Branko, who's been looking at job openings and highlighting once again the difficulty in relying on manipulated data. How are you going today, Branko?
Good. Keen to today's topic, Chris. I think there's a lot of different ways we can take it. So, yeah.
Well, we've talked about this many times, that the idea we get these reports coming out, particularly on the job numbers. They seem to be the worst at it. Do you want to start us off today with the big picture? What happened there? Really, if you could talk about the revisions and sort of why you went down this path with the article today.
Yeah, okay. So, brief overview that we've discussed in the past is these big reports are always kind of fudged. The numbers are fudged and it's not 100% accurate. So, the report that was released today was that there were 220,000 new job openings, right? And that far exceeded the expectation, which was about 7.95 million to 8.14. So you look at that, and then there are a few economists that are like, oh, this is great. You know, look how good this is. We're doing really well. But you actually dig into it and you find out a couple of things. But the main kind of area is this consistent, and I'll put up a chart now, this consistent theme where job openings are consistently revised below what they were originally announced as. So 14 of the past 17 months, we've seen a revision lower. So even though these numbers seem great on the surface, as always, you know, the current establishment wants us to say how good the economy is, but in reality, when you look under the hood, it's a lot worse.
And 14 out of 17, like that is to the point where it's ridiculous. Surely no one actually believes that anymore. Like when you get these numbers out, you jump straight to the sort of skeptical, okay, yeah, whatever. I mean, the market still does respond, but at some point, it's pointless exercise, right? If you're just going to revise it, particularly if you're always revising it downward every single time.
Yeah, I mean, it's no longer a coincidence, right? Once or twice or three times, but 14 out of 17, clearly there's, you know, some kind of funny business going on. And the fact that economists just repeat this as like it's gold standard is a bit worrying.
Now, digging into some of those numbers specifically, and even though, I mean, highlighting at the start, as we just did, you can't necessarily rely on them. But one thing that was interesting about the data that you pointed out was this idea of government versus private sector jobs, because you've got potentially very different motives, very different sort of outcomes when you think about private versus public sector. Can you maybe talk us through a little bit of that?
Yeah, so I'll put up this chart again that just shows the difference in public sector job growth versus private sector job growth. And you can see that private sector job growth has been steadily decreasing since kind of late 2021, you know, kind of post-COVID era. Steadily going down. And public sector is kind of inconsistent, but we saw a massive jump in the most recent report in the public sector. And it's a lot easier to probably manipulate the public sector part, the public sector job openings than private sector job openings. And most importantly, when you think of like a healthy and growing economy and employment market, you want to see private sector job growth drive that. That's going to be, you know, you think like an entrepreneur coming in, starting a business, hire lots of people, it takes off. That's good for the economy. The economy doesn't really rely on like government administrators. And, you know, as we know, governments are usually reasonably inefficient, at least compared to the private sector in managing finances. So, you know, the fact that this report was mainly bolstered by public sector jobs is another reason why I expect these numbers to get significantly revised down. And, you know, it'll be 15 out of 18 months in the near future that it will be revised down.
And even, I mean, there's a couple of bits to that because, yes, that revision down, you know, the numbers can be more manipulated, but there's possibly the incentive as we're approaching the end of the year. Like we're still a way off, but that election, you know, if you're going to offer jobs, the best way to get a whole lot of jobs in quickly would be through the government sector.
Yeah, I agree. 100% with that.
Yeah. Now, thinking a little bit more about that data manipulation, we've talked about political motivation behind that, and we were just sort of mentioning it. Then, even, you know, do you see that potentially you've got both parties, or not both parties, but particularly Democrats here, who are in that position of trying to bolster how it looks? Do you see that actually is flowing through, or has a potential to flow through? I mean, we know we had what could only be described as a disastrous debate last week, we've seen the flow-on consequences of that for Biden very recently, and sort of talks overnight about whether he's still going to be there or whether there's competition very, nipping at the heels. Do you think that data manipulation is tied into that, for example? Do we potentially see more of that over the coming month?
Yeah, I think with the presidential election campaign in November, we're heading up to that. We should absolutely expect not only more manipulation from these reports, but also just greater spin on a lot of different, economic indicators and things like that. For example, in the UK, they called an election recently. The Liberal Party over there called an election recently, and they did that on the back of good inflation numbers. So even though their like polling was low, right, they waited for some good inflation data to call the election and then to kind of promote that. And I think we're going to see the Democrats who are in power now just promote their good numbers that come up and their good employment growth, and obviously potentially spin any data in their way, as any party would do. This isn't like a Democrat only would do it. Republicans would do it too. It's just how it works. But if we can talk a little bit more about the debate and the presidential election, I mean, a bit off topic here, but it is. I don't know if people might have watched the debate back home, but what we witnessed last week was just absolutely unbelievable. I mean, Biden couldn't complete a sentence, and I think one of his great quotes was, "We defeated Medicare." That was just the most hilarious thing I've seen a president say, and I think that's an incredible.
Trump snapped back straight away on that as well, like, "Yes, you did," or something like that. Yeah, it was
just astonishing, and I think Kamala is now favorite to the past couple of days to take over Biden as well. So,
well, and that's quite shocking in itself that you've got. We're not even at the point yet where they decide who their nominee is, and the betting markets are now going against the sitting president. I mean, that would almost be unprecedented, you would think, in this type of environment. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an absolute dystopia we're living in. But in terms of how it's all going to affect it, I think we will see increased spin, especially because Biden himself can't talk, so he needs the numbers to talk for him. So I think he's probably even more important to promote the economy, given he can't string a sentence together.
So tying that all together, do you think if we look at those future predictions, or your future predictions at least, we've got those trends in job openings that we're not really sure about. We've talked about the public and private sector being, the unbalanced there. What's your prediction for the coming months in that actual data? So if you try and look through the noise, are you seeing that we really are in a slump that ultimately ends in the Fed, for example, lowering rates and introducing stimulus because they need to really prop that up? What's your view, sort of looking through all of that data and all the things we've highlighted today?
Yeah, so I guess overall, I do think that the trend in private sector job growth is going to be the prevailing factor, and that the fact that it's trending down means more likely that the real data is also trending down. So less job openings, more unemployment. However, I also think that the opposite way, there's going to be a trend of greater manipulation. So, for example, because now we have the lowest ever recorded response rate for the JOLTS reports of 33%, that means that 67% of the data is estimated. So obviously greater assumptions can impact the sample more than ever, right? Or more data manipulation can impact it more than ever, because they can manipulate 67% compared to 33 of the real data, you know what I mean? So in a way, it means that even though I think most likely job growth will go down, the data is now more manipulatable than ever. And in actual fact, we could see the real numbers, the fake numbers go up, but the real numbers kind of go down. And I think, again, given the state of the economy and people, the way people feel as well, you can kind of tell this isn't a great economy that we're living in, both in Australia and America and in the West. And the data doesn't reflect that. But I think the true data does. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, all of that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's stuff we need to keep thinking about, because we can't just rely, and that's really the point you're making right from the start. We can't just rely on what we presented here, because the numbers don't really add up in that sense. So we have to have that ability to think it through, to keep up to date with what's actually going on, and sort of end up somewhere in the middle of our understanding. So your work all the time really helps with that. So thank you for your work on that today. I think it's an area we'll need to continue watching. So thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.